In the shadow of his grace, Remy, a 40-year-old widow, stood by the grave of her husband, Samuel, who died unexpectedly from an undisclosed sickness. Their two children, Donald was 17 years old and the second child, Grace, was 15 years old when their father, Mr. Samuel, died. Remy and her children were overwhelmed with sorrow at the sudden unexpected demise of their father, mentor and an enviable role model. The children clung to their mother as their faces showed how sorrowful they were. Losing the spiritual head and the breadwinner of the family can be very devastating because the vacuum left can only be filled by the Holy Spirit. The future looked blank, but Remy and her children anchored their trust in God, who is able to keep and sustain them. In the somber atmosphere, Remy whispered a prayer, trusting God despite her deep pain. The family gathered for the reading of Samuel's will. Remy's heart sank as her in-laws, especially her brother-in-law, Charles, looked greedy. Tension rose when it was revealed that Samuel left the house and the business to Remy and the children, but Charles still had access to the money coming in from the company's sales. Charles suggested that Remy should sell the house to pay off the family debts. Remy refused, sensing an ulterior motive. Mr. Samuel Henry probably allowed Charles to have access to the company's account because he had always worked with him and Remy had been very busy at the home front. Charles and his wife, Ruth, started visiting Remy's house frequently, making subtle comments about how difficult it must be for Remy to live without her husband. They offered her help in handling the finances but undermined her decisions, implying that Samuel would have wanted her to let go of material things, but didn't bother to think of where she would stay with the children if she sells the house. Remy went to church, hoping for comfort. The pastor, a longtime friend of Samuel, offered condolences but soon pressured Remy to contribute more financially to the church in Samuel's honor. Feeling used, Remy prayed for strength as she began to feel increasingly isolated by the pastor and the church leaders. At the weekly women's meeting, Remy overheard some church women gossiping about her, suggesting that Samuel's death might have been God's judgment and wondered if Remy can manage her life on her own. Remy felt the sting of betrayal but remained silent, retreating deeper into prayer. Charles confronted Remy at home, demanding that she gives him more power over Samuel's business since he has more experience. Remy refused, adhering to her husband's wishes and the security of their home. The loss of a father in a family can lead to a lot of unpleasant stories and challenges in a home. One of such was Donald's attitude after the passing away of Mr. Samuel Henry. Donald started acting out, skipping school, and growing angry at God for taking his father away at the time he was needed most. He argued with his mother, Remy, blaming her for not understanding his pain. Remy was heartbroken. She prayed harder, asking God for guidance as her relationship with Donald deteriorated. The head of the family's demise most times affects the family financially. Obviously, the expenses carried out by two people has suddenly narrowed down to one person's expense. Bills began piling up. Remy struggled to make ends meet. She considered taking up a job but hesitated a bit, as she had been out of job for over 20 years. She reached out to her church for help, but it was met with indifference. One day, Remy's close friend, Agnes, accused her of being a burden on the church and her community, suggesting that Remy's financial troubles were due to poor decisions. Stunned by the accusation, Remy felt completely alone. Remy discovered that Charles had been secretly siphoning funds from Samuel's business to support his lavish lifestyle. She confronted him, but he denied everything and threatened legal action if she tried to interfere. Remy turned to God. She prayed fervently for wisdom. As she read her Bible, Psalm 23 comforted her. She decided not to retaliate against Charles, but to seek justice in a peaceful and prayerful way. During a prayer session at home, Remy experienced a deep sense of peace and heard a whisper in her spirit, which reminded her that God is her provider and protector. She cleaved to this promise. The following week, a local Christian charity organization reached out to Remy, offered her a part-time administrative job. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she accepted it as a sign of God's provision. Pastor James continued pressuring Remy to contribute more, hinting that blessing follows giving. Remy politely declined, standing her ground, and decided to take a break from attending that church. Grace, inspired by her mother's strength, began attending a youth Bible study. There, she found solace and community, and was growing stronger in her faith. Remy was encouraged by her daughter's spiritual maturity. Donald fell into deeper rebellion, getting into a physical fight at school. He was suspended, and Remy was called in for a meeting. This broke her heart, but she continued to pray for Donald's restoration. Remy met Abiola, a fellow widow at her new workplace. They formed a fast friendship, sharing stories of loss and faith. Abiola encouraged Remy to continue trusting God despite the challenges she was going through. One day, Remy received a generous anonymous donation at her door with a note quoting Isaiah 41:10, "Fear not, for I am with you." She was reminded that God is watching over her and her family. After weeks of rebellious behavior, Donald had a life-changing encounter at a youth conference that Grace convinced him to attend. He rededicated his life to God and apologized to Remy. Armed with faith and newfound strength, Remy gathered evidence of Charles' embezzlement and contacted a lawyer. The case began, and Charles became defensive. He accused Remy of slandering him. Some church members turned their backs on Remy for taking illegal action against his brother-in-law, Charles, claiming she was attacking her family. Remy stood firm, trusting that God will vindicate her. Donald became active in church and helped his mother around the house. Their relationship mended as Remy's prayers were answered. Remy received a promotion at work. The financial strain began to ease, and she praised God for providing in unexpected ways. In court, the evidence against Charles was overwhelming. He lost the case, and Remy was allowed to take over the company fully. She used the money to secure her family's future but chose not to boast about her victory. Pastor James realized he had been insensitive, visited Remy to apologize. She forgave him but decided to find a new church that better aligns with her values of faith and humility. Remy started attending a small, community-focused church where she found warmth, genuine care, and a stronger relationship with God. Inspired by her own trials, Remy began a ministry at her new church for widows and single mothers, providing support and prayer for those going through hardship. Grace, now more certain of her faith, told her mother she felt called to become a missionary. Remy was proud but worried. Together, they prayed for God's guidance. Donald took on leadership roles in the youth ministry, organizing events and outreach projects. Remy's heart was swollen with pride as she saw him become a man of faith. Remy realized that her faith had been strengthened through every trial. She thanked God for not only providing for her but for growing her into a woman of strength and resilience. Ruth, Remy's sister-in-law, confessed her jealousy and regret for mistreating Remy. In a moment of grace, Remy forgave her, showing the power of God's love. At a church worship night, Remy felt the presence of God strongly and had a moment of profound peace, knowing she was on the path He had set for her. Donald shared his testimony of rebellion and redemption at a youth event, and many young people were moved by his honesty and transformation. Grace embarked on her first mission trip, and Remy supported her every step of the way, knowing that God was guiding her daughter's steps. Remy reflected on how far God had brought her since Samuel's death. She had found purpose, her children are flourishing, and her faith is stronger than ever. The widow's ministry was growing, and Remy became a pillar in her church community. She feels fulfilled as she watches others heal through the comfort she once longed for. Charles, now broke and humbled, approached Remy for forgiveness. She offered him grace but encouraged him to seek God for true healing. Remy, Donald, and Grace sat together at dinner, laughing and sharing stories. The atmosphere of the home has shifted from one of sorrow to one of joy. Remy realized that every challenge she faced was used by God to deepen her trust in Him. Her testimony became one of hope for others going through dark times. After 3 years of Samuel's death, Remy went to his graveside, not in sorrow but in peace. She thanked God for carrying her through every storm. With her children by her side, she walked away, knowing that her strength comes from the Lord alone. 3 vital lessons to learn from the story, in the shadow of His grace. 1. Faith sustains in trials. No matter how dark the season, trusting God can bring light and peace. Remy's unwavering faith carried her through betrayal, financial struggles, and heartbreak, proving that God never abandons His children. 2. Forgiveness brings freedom. Even in the face of betrayal, Remy chose forgiveness over bitterness. Her grace toward those who wronged her demonstrates the power of releasing anger and trusting God to handle justice. 3. God turns pain into purpose. Remy's journey shows how God can transform suffering into a testimony of hope. Her struggles became the foundation for her ministry, helping others find healing through her experience. If this story inspired you, take the next steps. Watch the full story now to see how faith triumphs over adversity. Like the video to support content that uplifts and inspires. Share this story with friends and family who need a reminder of God's faithfulness. Subscribe to stay connected with more powerful, faith-filled stories. Thank you for watching. Bye.